Thank you, Ali, and thank you all for joining us. I apologize for this being late in the evening, so as a consequence, I will try to keep my remarks brief and make the best of the time that you have. One of the areas that the Madinah Institute has really, I think, impressed me as establishing a best in region, indeed best in class as far as the world goes, is in the area of key performance indicators and managing via KPIs. There's a tremendous amount of resources that are available through MILE that if you have not already made yourself aware of, you should definitely do so. I think that the materials that have been compiled there and the speakers and the experts that they have are absolutely outstanding and world-class. What I thought I would do tonight is to take a step back, if you will, perhaps provide a little bit of context for much of the discussion and the expertise that has been shared in this particular area over the past several months on KPIs and similar management techniques. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to talk more generally and more holistically about the concept of value creation. And so I've titled this webinar, Value Creation, the Means to Your End. What do we hope to cover tonight? First of all, what is value and why should we even care about it? Is it just a business school theoretic that is often bandied about by high-priced consultants? Is it simply a tool by those who are greedy capitalists? Or is there something more to this concept of value? And how does it apply to us as both thought leaders as well as leaders within our own organizations? Second of all, I would like to introduce the management philosophy of value-based management. A rather broad topic, but one I think that that captures a lot of the philosophies around a value-centric approach to leadership and managing businesses. And then finally, in the remaining time, to talk about some of the key issues around the implementation of a value-based management system. What are some of those key components and the mechanics involved in value-based management? So first of all, why are we here? What is value and value creation? Well, first of all, what value is not? Value is not stock price. Value is not the original investment that you made in the business. Value is not brand recognition or reputation. Value is really the economic quantification of all that the business has accomplished to date as it manifests itself in the business's future prospects. So what does that actually mean to unpack in just a moment? First of all, that the past is really irrelevant except for what it means for the future. And so when we think about value, we're always forward-looking. We're always thinking about what have we done to get us here today, and what are we doing to prepare for the future? And that really is what value is. And value creation? Value creation is all about the increase or the change in value of this value over time. The increase in value over time is going to be as a result of improved prospects for the future. So if the future looks brighter, if it looks more optimistic, if it looks more favorable, then that's going to result in an increase in value over time. And that, as managers, is certainly one of the key considerations that we have whenever we are making strategic decisions. Now, how does a focus on value and value creation impact your strategy? What does value creation really mean? It tells you, first of all, where and how to grow. Sometimes we rather naively think that growth for growth's sake is our prime directive. But value creation puts a finer point on that and really helps us understand where we should be growing and how should we be growing. Because as we'll talk about in a little bit, all growth is not necessarily good. Second of all, value creation really provides capital, whether that's internally generated capital from profits and cash flow, or capital from the capital markets externally. Maybe that's other investors Maybe that's other stakeholders that provide us with the financing that we need to continue to grow. And also, value and value creation provides talent. If you really think about it, value creation as a discipline provides improved talent training. It empowers our talent, our employees and our managers to do what they know best without unnecessary fetters and constraints. It really aligns all of our management employees, indeed the whole organization, in a single focus or a narrowly focused direction. So a focus on value and value creation also provides a development path for our talent itself. Now, we did earlier on ask the question whether or not value creation is the same as growth, or put another way, does growth always create value? You know, it's been shown, ironically, somewhat time and time again, that putting growth first actually can destroy value in some situations. Sometimes it can actually reduce a company's long-term growth prospects. So understanding and measuring value creation provides a framework by which we can objectively evaluate and assess our corporate activities and business structure, and objectively prioritize and allocate the limited resources that we have to maximize a sustainable and profitable growth path. So for example, in the early 80s, a company which you probably are familiar with, Coca-Cola, was mired in declining margins, stagnant revenue growth, struggling to maintain their market share. And they brought on a new CEO by the name of Robert Goizeta, who had learned or had been introduced to this notion of value-based management. And he, along with the senior management, instituted a company-wide initiative to evaluate each and every business activity that Coca-Cola was involved in, and each and every business relationship that Coca-Cola was involved in, using a value creation lens, if you will. And they discovered that even with a mature business such as Coke, there were significant opportunities to create value. And as a consequence, it's now history and it's very well known, but they were able to exit various non-core, non-beverages businesses, which they really had no business to be in. They expanded into new national markets. And in a rather innovative approach, they actually acquired, consolidated, and then spun off their bottlers, creating efficiencies in the supply chain. And all three of these major strategic initiatives came about because of their value-centric approach to evaluating how they did business, what they were doing business in, and how they allocated their limited resources. Lastly, why should value creation matter to you? I mean, we are business and thought leaders. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we have been entrusted the good of all of the stakeholders. So we might consider our primary purpose to be care for the employees, serve our customers, perhaps provide for the owners, whether that's an entrepreneur, perhaps a family, perhaps it's the government. We are to be a good representative for the country. Ultimately, we are to be good stewards of that which has been entrusted to us. Now, those might seem to touch upon a varied and diverse set of activities for the business and may even seem unrelated, but if you get right down to it, at its foundation, we must create value as a necessary condition in order to achieve our prime directives. So whether it's to serve our customers, whether it's to provide for the owners, whether it's simply to be good stewards for that which has been entrusted to us, value creation is the enabler. It's that foundation to which all of our other activities, our mission, our vision is based. So a brief comment then about why we were here. Now, as we begin to think about this value-centric mindset, it was probably first formalized by Professor Al Rappaport in his 1986 seminal book, Creating Shareholder Value. It's still in print today and still is very popular. Very good book, in which he lays out a management framework that is value-centric, that all the decisions are made with this value creation lens. And this basically eventually became known as value-based management. Now, there have been a variety of frameworks and implementation approaches that have further refined this and have been marketed by such consulting firms as McKinsey or Americon or LEK Consulting. But at they share a few common elements, and so I wanted to just briefly touch upon those now. First and foremost, value-based management is a specific way of looking at a business. It's a mindset. It's a philosophy that is ingrained in the very culture of the organization. It prioritizes long-term value creation above all other strategic metrics. That all other performance metrics, financial measures, KPIs, all of that, the organizational structure and processes, are evaluated through the lens of long-term value creation. Value-based management is stakeholder-centric. That is, all of the business stakeholders, whether they be owners, employees, customers, suppliers, or the community, are enriched by the creation of long-term value. This is not just about purely financial or economic gain, but rather how do we as an organization benefit all of those who we touch. Fourthly, to change and align behavior with a value-based management philosophy, there must be accountability for actions or decisions that are inconsistent with the creation of long-term value, as well as incentives, rewards, and recognition for actions and decisions that result in value creation. And finally, to bring us full circle, senior management, the leadership, must lead from the top by example and support from the bottom by empowering all employees of all levels of employees to be significant contributors of value. And this is the real, I think, strength and power of value-based management, is that it's not top-down. It's not leadership imposing their will upon the management and the employees, but rather it's empowering the employees and the management to become active participants in the creation of value for the good of all stakeholders. What are the three basic components of value-based management? What do all value-based management frameworks, regardless of the consulting firm, have at their core? Really three main elements. Think of them, if you will, as three major steps. The first is you have to be able to measure value. How is value measured? How is it quantified? And within this measurement of value, there are really two key areas that you need to focus on. First is you have to know what are the financial factors that determine value. So how do we quantify value? One of the things that we will talk about in the upcoming Palm 6 as well as the masterclass sessions, which I'll reference in a moment, is that future cash and cash flow are really all that matter. Accounting and accounting profits, that doesn't matter. Market share, that doesn't matter. In fact, revenues themselves don't matter. What matters is future cash and cash flow. That's how we measure value and value creation. So therefore, the question really becomes, what drives future cash flow? Now, it could be things like revenue, which in and of itself is a function of quantity, selling price, product mix, all of those marketing questions. It could be margins drive future cash flow, which will depend upon material cost inputs, your manufacturing process, your operating expenses. So all of the operational decisions and the business model that the company adopts will drive future cash flow. Certainly investment in physical plant and equipment, investment in working capital, those also drive future cash flow. So these are really the manifestations or the quantifications, if you will, of the various business decisions and business activities that are made every day within the company. In addition to the financial factors that determine value, we also need to understand and appreciate the strategic forces that impact value. We need to understand the market economics that are shaping the industry. We are merely a player within a much broader play. So you might need to, for example, perform a Porter analysis. So Michael Porter's 5 forces, as an example, is a typical framework that is used to describe and characterize the market economics. So the industry we need to understand, but we also need to understand our competitive position within that industry. And so whether or not you use something like a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or you use, not to belabor him, but Michael Porter's competitive advantage framework, whereas your strategy is a differentiator, or maybe your strategy is primarily cost minimizer. So these strategic forces, industry forces, as well as our competitive position, will influence what impacts value, and we need to understand what those are and how they impact value. So first of all, measure value. Second, we need to create value. So within the context of now understanding what levers to pull that drive value, we therefore need to identify and articulate and implement those strategies that create value by leveraging favorable industry dynamic factors or mitigating the pressures that are enacting upon us by either addressing disadvantageous market dynamics or our own weak competitive position. So the creation of value is all about the identification and implementation of the key strategies that essentially drive value. Then thirdly and finally, we have to manage value. We will manage value via the corporate governance and organizational structure that's in place. We'll manage value by aligning incentives, rewards, and recognition. We will manage value by leadership, by example, all leading up to managing the value by changing the culture. So the benefits of value-based management philosophy. First of all, it encourages, indeed it demands, consistency. We will make the same kinds of decisions in the same way with the same approach and analysis. This removes hasty and arbitrary decision-making, which is confusing at best and distracting and value-destructive at worst. So finding a consistent way of decision-making and a consistent way in steering the business. Second of all, transparency. Because everyone knows and understands how decisions are made and what the benchmarks are, there's no hidden agendas. There's no special projects. There's no dark, locked room where decisions are made and are just handed out. But again, it empowers the entire organization. It helps our people become better managers, better employees. Thirdly, it's an alignment of interests. It aligns the interests. All parts of the organization are, as we sometimes say, rowing in the same direction. Because we all are consistent in our decision-making processes, because everyone knows and understands how decisions are made, because everybody is incentivized and rewarded and recognized for the same successes, therefore we all are acting in support of each other rather than in opposition of each other. If nothing else, it makes the annual budgeting process that much more pleasant than it historically has been. Finally, value-based management is self-regulating. And this would require us to go more into the actual techniques in the management, which we won't have time to today. And I'll simply point you to additional resources at Mile or some of the programs that we'll be offering. But because all the costs associated with a business decision actually impact the creation of value and are incorporated in the decision-making process, managers automatically prioritize their investment and spend requests. And so the better projects naturally get funded, and the lesser projects or the value-destroying activities automatically get pruned away by management, by those who are actually day-to-day making those decisions. Now, value-based management is certainly has many, many advantages. We should not assume that value-based management is either easy or simple to implement. Otherwise, everyone would be doing it. What are some of the key challenges here that one would face? First of all, changing an organization's mindset and culture is extremely challenging and often painfully slow. Changing cultures requires time, resources, and patience. It's a long journey. Okay, it is not an event, it's a process. Second of all, value-based management requires everyone in the organization to embrace the approach. It's not something that we can decree on high as senior management or leadership and then impose that upon the managers and the employees below. We have to be committed at the top of the house. We have to lead by example. We have to make sure that not only are we measuring the right things and incentivizing the right things, but we are also engaging and interacting with our direct reports, with the employees, in a manner that's consistent with value-based management philosophy. Thirdly, value-based management gets complex really quickly, especially if you start to value process over substance. Too often we've seen in companies try to implement this and they get bogged down in numbers or in reports or in processes, and they lose sight of the central theme of value-based management. And as a consequence, it becomes too complex and it collapses under its own weight. So the challenge here is managing that complexity, really winnowing down, retaining only the most essentials, the most relevant processes and evaluation. Which leads me to that final point, and that is that value creation analysis is nice in theory, but unfortunately in practice we have to use metrics or we have to rely upon data that is not theoretically ideal, nor is it theoretically pure. And so we can't toss out the window our own intuition, our own strategic decision making, our qualitative strategic making, because we have imperfect measuring tools. So in conclusion, as far as value-based management goes, it's the best way to unify an organization around a clear, well-identified objective or objectives, that is, value creation. It aligns the entire organization's activities with the stakeholders' best interests. And for all the reasons that we've described before, it's a way to transform, to radically transform the business to prepare it for the future. So having defined and described a value-centric management framework, let's take a closer look at value and value creation itself, asking first of all, what creates value? Well, the first bullet point I make here is the peril of not knowing. And is ignorance bliss here? Unfortunately, it's not. As we've talked about before, revenue growth itself or simple accounting measures is simply not sufficient to create a sustainable business model. Not all profits are value creating. It's entirely possible to grow a company into bankruptcy or out of existence. It's entirely possible to have a company that is profitable and yet again cannot make payment to its payroll. Rather, management has to understand what factors influence value and which of those factors can be affected. All right, those are your value drivers, because remember again, as we said in the beginning of the webinar, value and value creation is fundamental to our ability to achieve or to execute on our prime directives. So value is important to know and understand, and second of all, we need to be able to identify what are the value drivers. Identifying and managing these key value drivers helps management focus their attention on and prioritize those activities that have the greatest impact on value and develop specific actionable strategies that translate into the overall corporate objective of value creation. So this is what helps management really keep their eye on what are they supposed to be doing. And these value drivers really affect all levels of the organization, which we'll speak about in a moment. There are generally three broad categories of value drivers: growth value drivers, Obviously, these achieve growth, but without sacrificing value. And again, not growth for growth's sake, but growth to create value. The second category of value drivers is efficiency value drivers. Now, these can either create value through increasing operating efficiency, which is doing more with less, or by the divestment of value-destroying activities. Basically, your pruning strategies. So efficiency is the second category. The third category are financial value drivers, and these essentially are intended to reduce the overall cost of capital, that is, reduce the cost of funding or financing the business itself. So three basic categories of value drivers: growth, efficiency, financial. Now, how do these categories align to the management and functional responsibilities? So let's look at it from their perspective. Well, at the very top, you've got executive and senior management. These guys are tasked with stakeholder value, maximizing stakeholder value, the benefit of the community, the benefit of the owners, the benefit of the employees, customers, what have you. The next level below that, business development, sales and marketing departments, divisions, these folks will primarily focus on growth drivers, identifying profitable, value-creating growth opportunities. The operations and production folks, those guys, they're focused primarily on the efficiency drivers. How can we do more with less? How can we prune that which is not creating value? And then finally, finance, controller, treasury departments, those are financial drivers. How can we maximize or optimize the use of what limited capital we have at our disposal? Now, value driver analysis. Recall that a value driver is something that has, number one, significant impact on value, and then number two is a factor that can be affected or controlled by management. Right, so that's important to keep in mind. A value driver is something that has a significant impact on value, and number two, can be affected or controlled by management. If you don't keep this definition in mind, the problem you could run into is that your list of value drivers is going to be way too long, too frustrating to comprehend and manage, and is going to be intermingled with other goals that don't directly tie to value creation, like new product introductions, increasing our distribution focus, our market share, all of which in and of themselves may be a value driver, but we want to get at the root causes or the root creators of value. Now, value driver analysis is typically comprises of these three steps you see here. Identify the value drivers, test them for sensitivity, and thirdly, test for controllability. How do we go about identifying value drivers? Usually what the consultants will do is they will come in, or maybe you would do this yourself, and you would essentially develop a value driver map for your business activities. You'd start with your broad operating parameters of the business, and then you'd break those broad operating parameters into successively smaller subcomponents until you reach a level where those daily operating decisions are made. All right? So, for example, you might start with operating profit as a broad operating parameter, and then you would decompose that into its key components, such as, say, revenues, product and manufacturing costs, distribution costs, advertising costs, overhead costs. You get the idea. And then what you would do is you'd take those and you'd break those down into the key inputs or drivers for those various components. So, for example, revenues. Price might be the key driver into revenues. So what's your pricing strategy? Raw materials and cycle time might be the key drivers or input for your product cost. Freight and warehousing costs might be the key drivers into distribution costs. So what would happen is that you would go through a detailed analysis. It's a lot of work, but you'd go through a detailed analysis where you essentially would develop a value driver map. Once you've identified what the universe or the set of value drivers are, you then need to go through and quantify the value impact for a given change in the value driver. And this is actually a very beneficial exercise because it often provides surprising insights where you may have been focusing on issues that in fact have very little impact on overall firm value and missing items that have a much greater relative impact on firm value. You also, though, in addition to what is the value impact to a change in the value driver, you also should consider the change, the sensitized change relative to the volatility in the value driver itself. So there are some value drivers that have a significant impact on value, but they really don't change very much. And so that's not going to be probably something that you want to spend a lot of time on. So now you've identified the value drivers, and you've even further focused on those value drivers that actually impact value. The last step is to assess whether or not management has the ability to actually affect the value driver. All right, so, for example, can you do anything about that value driver? There might be situations like heavy regulated inputs or industries where you can't control it. Perhaps natural gas is a major input to one of your activities. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot you can do about the price of natural gas, given that that's a global commodity. Or you might be in a heavily regulated industry where the prices are fixed as far as what you, or relatively fixed as far as what you can charge the customers. Well, clearly pricing is going to be a key value driver, but if you can't control it, there's not much you can do about that. So here's where you might also tie back into, we talked about the Michael Porter five forces analysis. Porter analysis can sometimes be very helpful here in assessing the relative bargaining power between industry and its customers and suppliers, and providing some insight into management's ability to change prices, terms, etc. So once you now have your set of value drivers and the like, you can then grid them out. So for example, something like this value driver grid, where you have 4 basic quadrants, 2 dimensions, the ability of management to influence the driver and the value impact of that particular driver. So clearly those value drivers that are absolutely influenceable and absolutely impact value, those are in quadrant 4, the upper right-hand corner. And those will typically be or become your KPIs, your key performance indicators. Now, that's not to say you only focus on quadrant 4. So in quadrant 1 here in the upper left-hand corner, these are factors which we can definitely influence, but they don't really have a whole lot of value impact, at least not now. So that's why those require diligent monitoring. And then the bottom right-hand corner, you have those factors which have a great value impact, but just can't be influenced by management very much. Take, for example, the natural gas raw material input that we cited earlier. Well, perhaps here you can hedge those exposures, or perhaps you can change your business model. Maybe you would backwards integrate to allow you to greater influence that particular input cost. So again, you don't only focus on quadrant 4, the KPIs. You still need to monitor those value drivers that fall into quadrant 1, and you need to look at alternative approaches to quadrant 3 value drivers to see if there are hedging opportunities or perhaps changes in our business model that might allow us to gain greater influence over that particular input. Okay, almost finished here. Let's make some closing comments here about implementation. So what are your key steps? Already we talked about. Number 1, identify, agree, commit to value maximization as the supreme goal. All right? In order to do that, you've got to be convinced that value maximization is the best for all of the stakeholders. Number 2, once you've identified value maximization as the supreme goal, you have to, number 2, identify the value drivers. We just talked about that. Number 3, you have to develop a strategy to how do you push and pull those value drivers to their greatest effect. Number 4, set targets. How do you know if you're going to be successful if you never actually set targets? So the setting of targets is very important. Number 5, what are your action plans to achieve those targets? And number 6, set up and establish a performance measurement system so that everybody is incentivized, that the culture changes to pursue all of these value drivers. So identification of the value maximization as a supreme goal, identify those value drivers, develop a strategy by which you will affect those value drivers, set some hard targets with real numbers, decide upon an action plan, and then finally set up the performance measurement system. Don'ts and do's. Here are some lessons learned. First of all, don't fail to clearly define objectives. Okay? You have to be absolutely crystal clear. You're talking about changing an organization. So therefore, you have to clearly define objectives at all levels of the organization. All right, how do you do that? Through a rigorous value driver analysis process, which we just discussed. Number 2, make sure that you don't relegate the initiative to just the finance department or the corporate planning department. Operating management must own this. Okay, they cannot be seen as just basically, as we say, bean counters pushing down to the rest of the organization. Don't think of this just as a project, but rather as a process. Okay, it has to become part of the culture. You have to ensure accountability for missed targets so that you can avoid a short-term budget focus. Don't fixate on a single metric. Don't be a victim of analysis paralysis. Right? You have to consider long-term and short-term measures of value creation because, as we said before, you have somewhat imperfect measurement tools. And so short-term measures of value creation like shareholder value analysis, economic value add, economic profit are not mutually exclusive from more complex longer-term measures such as discounted cash flows and present values. And then finally, don't use the IT department, the information technology department to lead the process because this invariably results in too complex of a solution for what is needed. It's kind of like trying to fix a watch with a hammer. So what about do's? Well, just start somewhere. I mean, just get started. Measure what matters. Incentivize recording accurate measurements. So just start. You've got the data, or make sure your systems can generate the data. That's a good place to start. Also, realize that this analysis is dynamic. So you're going to have to regularly reevaluate these KPIs. And again, much more could be said on the KPIs. A lot of very, very good resources here at the MILE website. Thirdly, make sure that you maintain the alignment between reporting and planning. You've got to have consistent rewards and incentives. People will behave the way you incentivize them. So incorporate value creation or value drivers discussion into your regular discussion and review topics. So for example, how has the value changed from the last time, since our last annual strategic planning review? What are the primary drivers of this change? How are the top KPIs that we've identified, how are those impacting value? And where are you at and where are you going with respect to your top KPIs? So it has to become part of the daily dialogue as well as the annual strategic dialogue. And lastly, most of all, remember the 3 C's. Commitment, communication, and compensation. Those 3 C's will go a long way in helping ensuring the success in your organization of incorporating a value-based management or a value creation-centric philosophy. What if you'd like to learn about a little bit more? Well, I would encourage you to look at, if you've not already done so, into our big class, the Palm 6 program. In that class, we'll be talking a little bit more about the tools and techniques that can be implemented and that are used by the best firms around the issue of evaluating value, measuring value, understanding what drives value, both in terms of resource allocation, like allocation of capital, as well as incentives. If you can't make the entire program for Palm 6, we'll also be doing a master class coming up later this month where we'll be spending the entire day focusing solely on these tools and techniques and providing a framework for aligning value creation with compensation and incentives. So in conclusion, regardless of your mission, what your stated mission is, value matters. It is the fundamental enabler of all that we do and all that we can do. Consider value-based management as a strategic framework and a philosophy by which you manage your business. Be aware that value driver analysis is really hard work, but the payoff is huge. The insights that you will gain from it are immeasurable. And then fourthly and lastly, just do something. Take some action. Do something differently, or else we will continue to get the same results as we've had in the past. And here are some resources if you'd like to learn a little bit more. In addition to the Palm 6 and Masterclass that I've already mentioned, we've got a number of webinars here at the site that provide you with a great deal of functional expertise in the area of KPIs. There are 2 other consulting firms that have really made value-based management as the cornerstone of their consulting practices. So you have Maricon Associates and LEK Consulting. Both of those are here in the United States. You can go to their website, and they have an abundance of additional materials, free materials that you can download and review for your own benefit. And with that, I see that I'm at 40 minutes. I will turn that back over to Ali to see if there are any questions or comments from the audience.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Michael Ho. Folks, we are open for the Q&A. If you have any questions, you could either raise your hand. There's a hand icon available on your webinar console, so I can give you a chance to speak to Dr. Ho, or you could put your questions in the question box. I do see there are questions already in the question box, so let me go straight and start reading them over. Okay, Doctor, first question. What possible risks decision makers apprehend while moving towards value-based management?
That's a very good question, and I would say first and foremost, what we have seen as far as successes and failures go are really around some of the early conversation that we've had in this webinar. Number one is a failure to apprehend and to appreciate how difficult it is to change a culture, because this really requires a change in the mindset of all the employees as well as management and leadership. That is oftentimes where we see failure start. What is often the root cause of this? Number one, a failure to be wholly committed to changing. This is not something that you can just try for a week or a month to see how it goes, but you really have to dig deep and to understand the benefits and the challenges of value-based management approach and what those risks are, and when you've fully committed to that, then and then impressing that upon the rest of the organization. So I would say cultural change is too often underestimated as the key challenge, and that oftentimes is because there's just a failure of resolve or commitment on the top part of leadership to incorporate the change.
We have, let me see, we have Brother Basim. Brother Basim, would you like to speak? I noticed you have also posted the question.
That's fine. My question is there. The balanced scorecard seems to be an ideal framework to implement the value driver maximization because it links cause and effect, and if you're looking at your effect, you want to maximize the value, you can start to propagate the tasks and subtasks to the departments. What do you think?
I agree with that. I think that is the balanced scorecard, KPIs, all of those further refinements to this are outstanding implementations, if you will, tactical implementations for this philosophy. The one comment I would make, however, because I've seen balanced scorecards used well, and I've seen balanced scorecards done very, very poorly. I've seen balanced scorecards implemented as just a means to implement it because my boss told me I had to do it, which of course is not the right way. I would just challenge all those who have experience or are considering the balanced scorecard approach is that as you are considering constructing your scorecard, that you are very deliberate, very disciplined about how those scorecard elements how they perform or how they impact directly value creation. Because unfortunately what I see is I see too many balanced scorecards where we have very soft and qualitative targets where we think that they are good things to do or to achieve, or we're not really quite sure why that's the case. We don't have a great appreciation for what the cost will be to achieve certain benchmarks and the like. But yes, I think in principle the balanced scorecard is an excellent component, excellent tool in your toolkit, as long as you still go back to the first principles of how does this ultimately impact value.
Unmuted.
Brother Basim, you're
Thank you. So it's really it's an implementation tool, but the reference should be always your driver's map. So you're always making sure that you're not getting sidetracked with not effective, non-effective tasks. Right?
That's correct. Because too many times firms will implement a balanced scorecard and they will think very good of themselves. when in fact 80% of what's on the balanced scorecard is either a distraction or it's actually irrelevant to creating value for the firm or for the constituencies. Yes.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you very much, Brother Bassem, for your question. Let me move to another question. Doctor, what are the common ways to increase value creation in negotiations?
That's a very good question as well. Of course, it's going to depend upon negotiation to negotiation, and I will, somewhat ashamedly, also have to point to our masterclass in Palm 6 as a forum where we will talk about this in greater detail. But if I can, in negotiations, clearly what you want to make sure that you are focusing on is negotiating over those items which have the greatest value impact. So, for example, if you are in negotiations, it may make you feel better, but it does not behoove you to spend a lot of your negotiation capital for those issues which really will not go to increase value. What are those things that might be able to increase value that you might be negotiating over? Clearly, pricing is going to be an issue. So what sort of pricing schedule are we going to have to agree to? Now, sometimes pricing schedule is going to be extremely important because that really is the only value driver that the management is able to actively affect. On the other hand, I give an example here for a client that I currently have. We're looking at buying a company which has mandatory price reductions that's being imposed upon it by its customers. However, in this particular business model, they have the ability, management has the ability, to influence the efficiency value drivers that allow them to mitigate somewhat those price reductions. So in their negotiations, they will always go into the negotiations with their customers knowing that they are going to have to concede somewhat on the price concessions. However, they always know, because they know what drives value, they know what the efficiency value drivers are and the impact on value. They know how much they can give up on those price concessions because they have a good handle on what those efficiency value drivers are.
Okay, thank you. Another one. Thank you for a wonderful webinar. However, value creation as a concept sounds too philosophical. Could you give a specific example where any unique concept of value-based management is quantified and easily measurable?
Yes, of course, it is indeed very theoretic and philosophic because we only had 30 minutes. So I plead guilty as charged. Specific examples. What I guess if we had a lot of extra time, we could go through some case studies of companies. I'll reference Coca-Cola simply because we referenced that earlier. That actually is a very fascinating case study to go through the transformation of Coca-Cola through the 1980s and the 1990s. I mentioned some of the actual actions that they took. Let me just pick one as an example. Prior to the implementation of a value-centric management approach, Coca-Cola distributed its product through a variety of bottlers and distributors. These bottlers and distributors were very diverse, they were unrelated, they were extremely fragmented. This was very, very inefficient from Coca-Cola's perspective. So in other words, they went to their efficiency value drivers and they saw, for example, what the inefficiencies were in their distribution model because they had a large number of bottlers that they had to go through. And so identifying that as both a value driver that has significant value impact and number two, something that they could influence. Well, they decided that the best way that they could influence was they actually ended up buying these bottlers themselves. They ended up consolidating all those operations, and eventually they ended up spinning out what used to be, say, 10, 15, 20 independent bottlers. Now a single Coca-Cola bottling enterprises, which is a single bottling company that was independent of them, which then could focus on bottling and production as their competency, and Coca-Cola could focus on the brand itself and the brand management. But this is a concrete example of how operationally and organizationally this value-based management approach manifests itself. Now, so what? So what ended up happening? Well, the good news here is that if you look at Coca-Cola's stock price or their market value relative to the overall market as a whole, what you'll see is prior to implementing this philosophy, the stock price is essentially stagnant. actually was losing ground relative to the broader market index as a whole. What you see is post this regime, you'll see that the stock price tripled, quadrupled relative to the market index as a whole, resulting in, as you might expect, very happy employees and very happy shareholders. So without more time of being able to actually go through a very specific case study, that's when I would point you to. There's a fair amount that's available online and through other consulting type resources that will document that. Practically speaking, bringing it down to your specific situation, we'd have to go into a more detailed analysis. We would actually look at a value driver model. We'd have to look at the various value drivers that are inputs into that model and how those might change. Again, that's something that we actually will talk about in actual implementation detail in the master class in Palm 6.
Great. We have another caller, so let me move straight. We have Brother Tamer Al-Manif. Tamer, could you please introduce yourself, where you're calling, and please ask the question? Oops. Brother Tamer, I'm not sure if you can hear us. Can you hear us? All right. Let's see. I think he has a noise background, I guess. So let me move to another question from Brother Najud Al-Sihli. He's asking, is adding a section of value monitoring, etc., will cost the company, especially if it is a starting business?
That's a very good question, in that it goes to fundamentally how do we measure value. So when you have a startup business, one could make the argument, certainly as an accountant would, is that there's no value here because there's no revenues or maybe there's no profits. That, of course, is the wrong way to look at it. Remember how we defined value at the beginning of the webinar. The value of a business or of a business activity is the culmination of everything that has come before it. Well, with a startup, there's not a whole lot that's come before it. It's basically just the idea. But importantly, value is really what's come before it only as it pertains to the future prospect of the business. So when you're dealing with a startup company, or startup idea, what you really there are only all that you have to look at is what does the future hold. Now, that's going to give you less comfort, of course, if you have no history or background, but that is inherent in the beast of a startup. A startup is inherently more risky, and therefore that as we look out to the future, we're going to our challenges are going to be a little bit different. We're going to have to be able to more clearly define the business model and how that business model actually generates revenues, profits, cash flow, how it generates value. And so it's in that exercise that this can still be very useful. And indeed what it does, I think the best part is it removes us from a rather short-term orientation. I've got a startup, I give it 6 months, and if it doesn't work in 6 months, I quit. No, a value-based management approach is going to look far beyond 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, because it really is looking at the future, what the future holds. And I think that is much more liberating for management because it removes them from having to make short-term focused decisions.
Well, okay, we have a supplementary, and my apologies, I was Sister Najud Al-Sahli, and she has asked a supplementary. So do I have to look for other companies and how they measure the value in their company and apply it to mine, or how can I know the best implementation?
Very well put. Certainly if we're just starting out, there's no reason why we can't look at other success stories, and they may or may not be in your industry, by the way, but certainly to start out with would be to identify and perhaps evaluate some of these firms that have implemented this successfully. Now, how can one identify them? That sometimes can be a little bit more challenging, but of course there are many consultants out there, I'm sure, that would be happy to help you. Sometimes these companies, especially if they are widely publicized or public in certain countries or exchanges, there will be published information that these companies actually make known to the world on how they measure success, how they are making decisions. So that sometimes can be a good resource to help you understand what they do. I think also there are conferences and other types of programs which focus specifically on this, so you'll get to hear certain success stories and failures and horror stories. So I would suggest starting most general first, and that is identifying a few big name companies. I've given you one. Coca-Cola is one as an example. Lloyd's Bank is another name that has that has been suggested as well by Maricon as an example. Picking some of those older cases that have been and seeing what they did, what they learned, and the like. We will be covering a company in the Palm 6 and Master class by the name of Briggs & Stratton. Briggs & Stratton is a global manufacturer of small engines, and we'll be in fact specifically talking about how did they implement a compensation and recognition scheme that is based upon value creation and some of the lessons that they learned, some of the things that they did right, some of the things that they did not do right. So I would start first and foremost generally, and then based upon what you learn there, then you can start to adapt to your particular industry and then ultimately to your particular specific company situation.
Well, that really brings us towards the end of the webinar. I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Michael Ho, for your time and for sharing this valuable input. And folks, as Dr. Michael Ho was referring to Palm 6, please be informed that this upcoming leadership development program is going to be held in Madinah starting from April 12th. I have broadcasted the link of palm.mile.org. You can visit and learn more and can apply online for this program. Thank you everybody who participated in this webinar and for the questions and making it an interactive experience for all of us. Once again, Dr. Michael, thank you very much. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give?
None. I was very impressed by the questions and the engagement. Hopefully this gives you at least something to think about. Maybe it sparks your interest that you might want to look into this further. So thank you again for spending valuable time this evening.
Everyone, so you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. I'm going to end this webinar.